When you think about it, the story of humanity is, well, it's bizarre. For millions of years, our ancestors just sort of existed, evolving at a snail's pace. And then, bam, in the blink of an evolutionary eye, everything just exploded. We started building massive cities, we figured out writing, we started reaching for the stars. The big question is, how did that happen?
And that right there is the central puzzle we're digging into today. I mean, mainstream science has its theories, of course, but what if the answer was written down thousands of years ago? Because some ancient texts, right from the cradle of civilization, they offer a totally radical explanation. An explanation that says our sudden leap forward, well, it wasn't an accident at all.
Just take a look at this timeline. It's kind of staggering. For millions, literally millions of years, our biggest technological leap was what? Making a stone spearhead a little bit pointier. And then look at the last 30,000 years. It's nothing. It's a cosmic blink. In that time, we went from stacking the first stones at Göbekli Tepe to landing freaking robots on Mars. I mean, the sheer speed is almost impossible to wrap your head around. So what in the world could explain that kind of acceleration? All right, so let's dive into this first part of the mystery. We're calling it mankind's impossible leap. And it's all about this huge gaping hole in our history. A time when modern humans were around, but apparently not doing a whole lot. Get a load of this number, 225,000 years. That's how long Homo sapiens, people with brains just like you and me, were wandering this planet before the first real civilization popped up in Sumer. So you have to ask, right? What were we doing for 250,000 years? It's this huge, unexplained gap in our story. Well, this is where it gets really wild, because some of the oldest texts we have, from the ancient Sumerians, they propose an answer that just shatters the conventional story. They claim our intelligence, it wasn't some slow, random process of evolution. Nope. They say it was a deliberate upgrade, that we were engineered. And that brings us right to the heart of this whole thing, the Anunnaki blueprint. It's a story of gods, gold, and, well, genetic creation. According to these tablets, it wasn't just an upgrade, it was an act of creation, and not by anyone from around here. So who exactly were the Anunnaki? The texts describe them as beings from another planet, a planet called Nibiru, right here in our own solar system. And they supposedly showed up here about 450,000 years ago. But here's the kicker. They weren't explorers. They were miners, and they were on a desperate mission for one thing and one thing only: gold. Okay, but why gold? This is the really fascinating part. It wasn't about money or treasure. It was about survival. The story goes that their home planet, Nibiru, was dying. Its atmosphere was collapsing. Their scientists figured out a solution, a sort of planetary sunscreen made of microscopic gold particles suspended in the air to reflect deadly radiation. Great idea, right? Just one tiny problem. They were running out of gold. But they knew exactly where to find more, right here on Earth. So for a while, the Anunnaki used their own lower-class workers, called the Ajigi, to do all the backbreaking mining. But imagine doing that for 150,000 years. Yeah, eventually they rebelled. The Anunnaki had a problem. They needed a new workforce. So they looked around, and they saw the local wildlife, the primitive hominids running around, and they got an idea. What if we took one of them and upgraded it? What if we spliced our own DNA into its genetics? And according to the tablets, that's exactly what they did. The result was the very first human, a being they called Adamu. Sound familiar? And, this whole idea of gods creating humans, it's not just in the Sumerian stories. Look at this. It's a pattern you see all over the ancient world. In Sumer, it's the blood of a god mixed with the clay of the earth. In the Bible, it's man being made in God's own image from the dust on the ground. In Egypt, a god's tear falls on clay. It's always the same recipe, some kind of divine essence, which proponents of this theory say is just a primitive way of describing DNA, is mixed with earthly material. How do so many different cultures, supposedly isolated from each other, end up with the same basic story? But the experiment, well, it got out of hand. Humanity became too smart, too numerous, and way too violent for the Anunnaki to control. So the story goes that when their planet Nibiru was scheduled to make another close pass by Earth, an event that would cause massive cataclysms, the Anunnaki just decided to let it happen, let the Great Flood wipe the slate clean and get rid of their little problem. And again, just like the creation story, this idea of a global world-ending flood isn't just in one place, it's everywhere. But just look at the comparison between the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh and the Bible story of Noah. It's basically the same tale. A guy is warned by a god, he's told to build a massive boat, save all the animals, the seeds of all living creatures, and then he lands on a mountaintop after the water goes down. The details are so incredibly similar, it's hard to believe they aren't both talking about the same catastrophic event. Okay, so this entire mind-bending story was basically introduced to the modern world by one single person. And this is where things get, let's just say, very complicated. We have to look at the man behind the curtain and the massive controversy his work created. This man right here is Zecharia Sitchin. Now, he wasn't a formally trained academic or anything, but he taught himself how to read ancient Sumerian cuneiform. And in 1976, he published his bombshell book, The 12th Planet. His claim was simple and profound. He said this whole Anunnaki story wasn't his theory, it was a direct word-for-word translation from the ancient tablets themselves.
But, this is the big but, this is where Sitchin's work completely collides with mainstream scholarship. Take the word Anunnaki. Sitchin translates it as, those who from the heavens came. Sounds very sci-fi, right? Well, pretty much every other expert translates it as royal blood or royal seed. Big difference. Or Nibiru. Sitchin says it's a 12th planet. Academics say the word just means crossing and probably referred to a bright star or maybe the sun at a certain time of year, not a planet.
So what does this all mean? It means the real bombshell is what the texts don't say. According to the experts, there's no mention of flying chariots, no mention of mining gold to fix an atmosphere, and no mention of a rogue planet on a 3,600-year orbit. The consensus is that Sitchin's work isn't really a translation, it's his own unique interpretation. So, okay, it's easy to just dismiss the whole thing as a bad translation, right? Case closed. But not so fast. Because even if Sitchin got the details wrong, that original mystery, or impossible leap, is still there. And some very recent, very real scientific discoveries have made the whole thing even weirder, with some spooky echoes of Sitchin's story. Here's a fantastic bit of irony for you. Sitchin was almost certainly wrong about the word Nibiru, but he might have been accidentally right about the planet. Just a few years ago, researchers at Caltech announced they have powerful gravitational evidence for a huge hidden planet way out in the dark corners of our solar system. They call it Planet 9. And get this, its predicted orbit is long and highly elliptical, eerily similar to the orbit Sitchin described for Nibiru. Then you've got these things, the Paracas skulls from Peru. I mean, first off, the elongated shape is just plain bizarre. But the real shocker came from DNA tests done in 2014. The results were a bombshell. The DNA didn't come from anywhere in the Americas. It traced back to the Middle East. And one skull's genetics pointed directly to Mesopotamia, the heart of ancient Sumer. So how on earth did people with ancient Sumerian DNA get to Peru thousands and thousands of years ago? But maybe the weirdest piece of the puzzle comes from inside our own bodies, from our DNA. Scientists at the world-renowned Max Planck Institute pinpointed a specific gene, it's called TKTL1, that seems to be the secret sauce for our big brains. It's what lets us create neurons way faster than our cousins, the Neanderthals. It's basically the gene that makes us human. And this is where it gets absolutely nuts. The mutation that gave us this superpower, it wasn't some long, complicated series of changes over eons. No, it was a change of just one single amino acid in that one gene. That's it. And that's weird. That's not really how random natural evolution is supposed to work. It's just too clean, too precise. In fact, scientists have pointed out that this is exactly the kind of change you'd expect to see if you're using technology to deliberately target and manipulate a gene. It doesn't look like a messy accident of nature. It looks like a precise surgical edit to our source code. So, look, the Anunnaki story as told by Zecharia Sitchin, it's got some major holes in it. But we're still left with these incredibly profound, unanswered questions. We've got a mystery planet lurking in our solar system. We have ancient DNA from the Middle East showing up in Peru. And we have a genetic signature in our own DNA that looks suspiciously like an artificial upgrade. So I'll leave you with this thought. The Anunnaki story might not be the right answer, but then what or who flipped our genetic switch?